Welcome to Makers and Movers. I'm your host, Andrea Hoffer. In this episode, I'm excited to speak with Adrienne Gordon, an expert in strategic pricing who's been making waves in how manufacturing companies get paid since the 1990s. Her company is Pricing Empowered. Welcome, Adrienne, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. This is a great topic. It's one we haven't actually started to talk about yet on this show. So I'm really interested to dig in a little bit. Can we start off with just a little bit about your background and how you got into pricing strategy?
Yeah, most people who work in pricing, they don't decide they're going to be a professional pricer. So I did not. I started my life as an engineer in biomedical engineering, and soon after, after doing some sales, ended up as a product manager for a company called Parker Hannifin. It's a Fortune 500 conglomerate of manufacturing and distribution companies. And there, I was getting my MBA, and they decided they wanted to pilot something called strategic pricing, and I was young and I knew how to use a computer. So somebody said this is a very analytical task, and so it needs somebody who can actually use a computer. They asked me to do it. I learned from a consultant at the time, and ended up being a corporate initiative. So Parker had 138 companies, and so I was asked to help project manage the rollout across the world. So I got to work with pretty much 138 different companies on learning how to basically model out their pricing. And so great experience. And then from there, ran pricing for American Greetings, did a little work for Eaton, which is another manufacturing business. And then I've been consulting since.
Interesting. So you kind of just fell into it.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about a company comes to you and they want to hire you for a project. What happens? What's the process there?
A lot of times when we get a call, it's because somebody's frustrated that they believe their company is creating value that they're not getting paid for. And in manufacturing specifically, it's very common to spend a lot of time on understanding the cost to do products, to make products. And then pricing tends to be sort of an afterthought. So a lot of energy is put into when I create this new, widget of whatever it's going to be, what's the cost, and then we're just going to put acceptable profit on top of it, and that becomes the price, which may or may not work because customers don't care about pricing. So when they come to us, it's because an executive has recognized that, and so they're looking for somebody who's had the experience of migrating the company away from that type of pricing into something more sophisticated. And so they're looking to see how we would do it, and we kind of go through a process with them, and usually it ends up being actually a pretty long engagement because there's a lot more than just strategy that's involved. There's a lot of change management and cultural changes and things like that that have to happen.
Talk to us about that because I know there's a strong people component to it from conversations we've had in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about that people component and how it affects the leaders in a company and the people that work there?
Yeah, so so I think that's what makes our company kind of unique. So there's a lot of tools that pricing consultants use. Kind of we call it pricing science. But what makes us unique is that's only 50% of the formula. And pricing is a very emotional topic. So I have this philosophy that people tend to undervalue themselves, right? It's why we don't like asking for raises. It's why we don't like to have negotiations as being told that we have to raise prices when we're in a professional role. And so it's a very emotional process that we have to break through. And so from our standpoint, it's because people tend to undervalue themselves and they build these stories that when you put them in an organization together, they have similar experiences, they mirror it to one another, and so it's much easier to kind of go to the lowest common denominator and not have to have really hard conversations with customers about your value. And so if it's good enough for a manufacturer that we're making enough money, why would we push it? And so one of the things we need to focus on is to talk about reframing what that means. And so, for instance, people can have the conversation that, yes, you might feel a little undervalued. And so you probably would want to have a hard conversation about maybe getting a raise, even though that might make you uncomfortable. We have to do the same thing for our organization. So, really, pricing is just your organization's salary. And so we have to get the whole organizations to start rethinking that it's okay. It's okay to ask for a little bit more if you've actually created that value.
That's so interesting. So it's almost like a living organism, which it is, right? The organization is a living organism, but you're comparing it to people. And then how does that affect the whole team? Once the organization realizes, well, maybe we need to raise our prices and here's why and here's our value, how does that play into the rest of the team that works for the manufacturing company?
Yeah, it's really interesting question because I liken it as it's almost like a self actualization path that we take through organizations through. So there's a lot of resistance in the beginning and fear, and let's like maybe have side conversations about the consultant because they don't know what they're going to they're talking about, and so we tend to do as we work with organizations to take small steps. So we're going to do small changes in low risk ways, and we may actually tell the people they have no choice, the employees, we're just going to do it. But what we do that with intent so that when it doesn't create any chaos and they might not lose business in a place that they thought they would, they start building some organizational confidence. And the more they see that evidence of that confidence, they start realizing, wow, I totally didn't realize how great my company was. And so usually we end up on pretty long engagements with our clients. By the time we leave them self sufficient, usually they are way more comfortable having really hard value conversations with customers. They're using similar language in their own organization about their value, and they're just kind of like a more peaceful, less stressed environment, if that makes sense.
It does. So the value that you bring as an organization is not just we're going to help you figure out the right pricing, but it's so much more than that. You're helping them to improve their culture and to improve how they look at themselves as individuals and how they look at themselves as an organization. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's basically our mission. I mean, we do both, right? We do the
Mhm.
pricing science, but we use the pricing science as well as training, and we do a lot of like game theory and role playing and things like that to help them move through the whole process. So it's not just math. There's a lot of soft side.
And you said that you have a very unique approach, and that sounds very unique to me. Are there any other companies that do something similar, not just the pricing strategy, but that more holistic approach that you have?
Yeah, I mean, and there's other pricing consultants that have recognized the need for that. I think one of the things that makes us unique is we have a proprietary framework we use that actually takes every stakeholder in an organization, whether they know they're a stakeholder in pricing or not, and we actually bring them into our process. So by design, our framework will bring in the C-suite. It will bring in finance leaders, marketing leaders, sales leaders, it'll bring in operations leaders, and then we'll get in analysts. And we actually use the framework to make sure that every person who could or might undermine the entire journey to full value return, we make sure that they're all on board and they understand why they're an important piece of it.
What does that first conversation look like when you say you bring them all together? How do you approach it? What does that look like?
Well, we usually do a kickoff for larger projects anyway, where we talk about that pricing is it's a journey. Getting your full return on value as a company is something that doesn't happen overnight. It's an evolution, and then we talk about areas that each of them might be creating value. That for manufacturing, right? It's easy to go to the product. My product lasts longer. It's high quality. It's durable. Whatever those things may be, but at the same time, for instance, a good example might be you may have somebody in logistics that's negotiated a great freight rate. So they get a discount on when they ship something out. And there's a tendency to just pass that along to customers. Well, to explain to the rest of the organization, wait, that particular negotiation to get a discount on freight rate from a cost side is actually value that was created. And why would you pass that all onto the market? You should keep some of that to yourself, right? And when you start using examples of that on people who are actually changing the value of the company and that they should have confidence in keeping part of that fair share, they start looking at each other's roles in different ways. And so that's usually how we kick it off is we point out all of the different ways different parts of the organization are actually creating value. And then we talk about how we're going to now collectively protect that value and share that value.
That's very interesting. And if you were to speak with someone who's just starting a manufacturing company, maybe they have one or a few SKUs and their small team, is any advice come to mind as far as that pricing piece and building that value and understanding the value that even as a small team that is going to be growing brings right now?
Yeah, I mean, the number one, and again, in manufacturing specifically, there's a tendency to go to cost plus some, minimum profit level. Customers could care less about your costs. It is incredibly short sighted, especially when you are just starting. So, manufacturers that are just starting, they have not built out the demand to really understand what they will be, what the cost structure is going to look like. So they tend to price on their current whatever demand is, and it's a chicken or the egg thing because they're not pricing to the market, but at the same time it's short sighted on the profit. And if they could really think through what's the value they're creating when they're the size they want to be, it's a totally different answer. So we walk through a process, especially for small companies that are just starting, where we really put cost aside. That's the last variable we ever look at. And we look at all of the value drivers that they're creating from an economic consequence standpoint. So, like, marketers are great. Features, benefits, advantages, like, spit them out all the time. And I'm like, when you get into business to business and you're a manufacturing company selling to another business, they don't care about features and benefits. It's just words, right? You need to be able to translate that into something that is quantifiable. And so we walk them through it. And almost all the time, the number that they come up with is so different than cost plus some margin. And it can blow their mind away. It might be 400% higher. That all this extra value that they created, they just had no idea.
Hmm. And if I'm understanding correctly what you shared earlier, you just released a new sort of service towards some smaller type businesses. Is that correct? Is that the
Yeah, so
price space?
PriceSpace. Yeah,
Okay.
PriceSpace is a platform. So we have some tools underneath that. There's a structure, sort of as I mentioned before, a framework we use that's called the Return on Value Blueprint, and it's really about taking all of these learnings and all the stakeholders and addressing them so that they're putting in the foundation to price right immediately and not have to wait until they're a large company that's hiring, a team of consultants on a big engagement.
Would it be useful for a different type of company, like a service company?
So the framework itself is useful for any company. There's some fundamental concepts that cross all businesses. One being pricing is not an event; it's a process, and it's an evolution, and that there should be four parts of that process. So we build strategy, we roll it out, we need to measure it, and then we need to change the strategy. So those are all fundamentals, and the stakeholders tend to be the same across. So the training is very similar. Some of our tool sets are somewhat specific to manufacturing and distribution at this point, but we do intend to evolve into retail and service in our next rollouts.
It's really interesting. I never thought about the whole science behind pricing. When I was in business school, the only thing they really taught us about pricing, besides the cost plus margin piece, is put a 5 on the end, or a 9 on the end, or a 7. I think those are the three numbers. And there's some sort of psychology that it will increase the number of people who kind of take a second look and think about purchasing. Is that something that you've heard before? I'm sure it's pretty widespread.
Yeah, so there is some psychology. It tends to be a little bit more consumer based than business to business.
Mm.
There's other psychology in business to business.
Oh,
So some of it's secret sauce, but yes, yeah.
okay.
So psychology is obviously very important. And again, it comes back to the idea that people tend to be afraid to have some of these conversations, and especially in B2B, buying groups have become very powerful in the United States, and it's a lot harder for groups of professionals in pricing to get together and have conversations on how to manage really tough negotiations than it is for buyers because of price exclusion laws. And so there's actually a little bit of, in my opinion, of imbalance there, where right now I think procurement agencies or procurement groups tend to have a little bit more power at the seat at the table. So one of the things that we do try to address is the psychology of those conversations and how to take some of that power back.
You can really see your passion for what you do. It comes through with everything you say. What do you find to be the most rewarding about what you do?
Well, I do enjoy, sometimes we work through companies that get acquired and then resold, and everybody gets bonuses, and we get to
Mm.
see some people like retire because some of the work we've done, which is amazing. So that's really rewarding. Also, new business when, for instance, we just had a client pretty recently that was somewhat stagnant on a new product for like 3 years, and then we had kind of redefined their value pricing, not only the pricing structure but also how they were going to talk about their value in the conversations. And they just landed like a 3 year order in one, 3 years worth of volume in one order last month. So that's really cool too, is to know just by helping them reframe to understand what this particular solution was doing for their customers, it totally changed the game for them.
So it plays into sales as well. I guess it's all
Absolutely.
connected.
It's all
Mm.
connected.
Very, very interesting. And are there any special plans for the company going forward? I know you just released this platform. What is your vision for the next few years?
Well, our mission really is, we're sort of growing to the space of just disrupting how companies recognize their own value and are recognized for their value. And so part of that is we've spent the last 12 years really focused on large companies, and we want to get the message out. We want to make that same competitive advantage open to smaller companies. And so the platform's the first part of it. We're getting really specific now on how we're going to tailor specific products and services so that they'll be accessible to smaller companies. We're going to start doing a lot more training so that even if you can't afford, for instance, the software or a consulting engagement, at least you can come in and get the concepts, through a 1 day or 3 day workshop. So that's really our goal right now, is to start pushing to smaller companies who realize that they could potentially get recognized for more of their worth.
So what would be your one piece of advice for somebody? It could either be somebody starting out in manufacturing or somebody who just has been part of a large company for many years. If you wanted to share
Well,
one thing, what would it be?
can I steal two?
You can give me three if you want.
So, I always come back to, again, customers don't care about your costs, and you should never meet your competitor's pricing, because then you're holding yourself to the lowest common denominator in your industry. So, you always need to look at value from your own perspective, and one way to do that is to offer multiple versions of your same offering so that you control the value conversation with the customer and they're not looking at something else. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is things are about to be very different in conversations around value because of AI. AI is brilliant in looking at history and coming back and having conversations with you from a customer standpoint on how your customer thinks about your products and services. But it's very limited because it's limited in the way that most companies have historically thought about price. And so what ends up happening is, since most companies in manufacturing look at cost plus, they haven't really gone through this whole value transformation. AI is just going to regurgitate what has been, right? And so this is specifically the time to start looking at value from as many alternative outlier positions as you can, because it's out there. There's value you have not captured. 100% of any business, whatever they sold, was going to be at or below market. Because if it was above market, it would not have been awarded. And so finding those areas where you might have actually gone in too low, it's the time to do it because AI won't know.
Hmm. That's really good advice. AI, of course, is making waves in every way possible. And it's a good point that it only knows what it knows from the past. And you have to think about things that maybe it hasn't captured. So tell us, is there anything that we have not covered that you want to make sure we cover before we wrap up today?
And I think that one thing, we get asked a lot is if you're going to hire somebody to take on pricing, who do they report to and what do they look like? And it's really unique because there is a growing need and desire to have a pricing professional in people's companies as its own standalone function. And the answer to that is it's complex, but don't underestimate the value of that role because when companies bring in a pricing manager into the organization, it returns on the investment of that position like 10x immediately. And so that person is just somebody who's got a little bit of empathy on the sales side, but they also kind of are analytical. So it's a unique individual. But companies who really understand it, they invest in a strategic person to do that. They get paid for it immediately. And so I know that staffing and building organizations around high quality people is something that you are an expert at. So I just thought I might mention it is a growing field, and it's often undervalued, but companies that invest in it do not regret it.
I'm really glad you mentioned that because we are seeing as things get a little tighter with the economy and companies are kind of holding off on hiring for certain positions. The one role that the companies seem to still be hiring for is sales because they can connect an ROI to it pretty easily. But I'm glad that you mentioned there are other roles, such as a pricing strategist, that you can connect to an ROI quickly as well. So it's a really good point that that role and maybe some other roles, there are ways to have an ROI fairly quickly from it, and it's not all about the person who's selling.
For sure. And, again, most organizations, especially manufacturing, they have initiatives around growth, they have initiatives around cost savings. They do not have initiatives around price, but 1% change in price typically nets a 6% change in net profit for a manufacturing company, where you're looking at a small fraction of that for a change in cost or a change in volume. So you get the bang for your buck. It does not take a lot of effort to get a little bit better in price and see massive changes in your profit.
Adrienne, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to learn about you or to connect with you?
So pricingempowered.com, pricebase.com. Check me out on LinkedIn. Looking forward to, anyone who wants to have a chat. I'm happy just to, have a quick call and what's going on with your pricing, what's going on with your value. We spend a lot of time, just even small companies just that don't even know where to start, have that quick conversation. Really happy to have that conversation with anyone.
Great, thank you. And we'll make sure to include your URLs for your website and your LinkedIn on the show notes, as well as your bio that I know you provided to me. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time and your expertise. This has been such a fascinating topic and so different than anything we've explored on this show before. So thank you so much for coming on today.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you to those of you that have joined us to listen in. I am Andrea Hoffer with Makers and Movers. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate you subscribing to our channel and maybe sharing it with others that you think may get some value out of it. Thank you again, and this was Makers and Movers.